On this episode of China Unscripted, China sends a spy balloon over the U.S. The U.S. general predicts war over Taiwan in 2025, and the new Czech president angers China. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Jung.
And I'm Matt Gnesta.
And China is attacking America with balloons. A lot of them. 99 of them. All of them red. Shelley, what do we do about this red menace?
Well, I see the podcast is going off to a good start.
This just broke. Unfortunately, it happened right before we filmed our weekly headlines episode. But
I mean, it actually they actually said the U.S. officials will release a statement Thursday night, so well after we recorded headlines for this week. But
China sent a spy balloon. You said it was a big balloon, right?
The balloon is apparently 3 bus lengths in size.
The short bus or the long bus?
I think a regular bus.
A regular bus.
So it makes you think, I guess now I'm picturing the Hindenburg of spy balloons, you know what I mean? Because I guess I always thought of spy balloons as being smaller, which I guess it doesn't necessarily make sense if they have to hold enough air or whatever they're filled with.
I guess you just think of spy cameras, things that you could put in a little button, buttonhole. Buttonhole camera.
Should I explain why you're doing this? Chris is making fun of me because I was reading a Guardian article about the spy balloon and it talked about buttonhole cameras, but my brain went butthole camera. So I was very confused for a minute until I realized what had happened.
Did you know about the Soviet experiments into creating butthole cameras?
No, please tell us about the Soviet experiments. Actually, it sounds like something that would happen, right?
Yeah.
This whole thing, actually, the spy balloon thing, doesn't it sound like some kind of weird Cold War throwback?
Well, what I found surprising was that this is not a one-off thing. This happens fairly regularly, actually. Just for some reason, the U.S. government is now making a big deal out of it this time.
Well, I mean, firstly, I want to say that China should have just painted their balloon blue.
So it'd be hard to spot. Noticed. Maybe
the problem I think is that the Chinese regime does a lot of spying, right? So they're spying on our WeChat communications, potentially TikTok, definitely huge amounts of corporate espionage, but all these things are hidden, right? And sometimes it's hard to show me a picture. It's
subtle
it didn't
and sophisticated.
Happen. Yeah.
Not usually a gigantic balloon.
Right. And so there's something psychological about the presence of a gigantic balloon that makes people suddenly feel the threat, even though it's actually substantially less of a threat than many of the other things the Chinese regime is doing in terms of their warfare.
I would say TikTok is probably a bigger threat than a surveillance balloon.
Collecting data from millions of people, all these young people, they're collecting
the
their
minds of China's youth.
Of China's youth?
America's youth. Turning them into Chinese youth with the red terror.
Yeah. I mean, I would say they're unclean, sort of dirty.
Thank
Matt, I was looking to you for support, but instead you decided to join in the trolling.
Matt's my bro.
Yes. I see what's happening.
I have never not wanted you to say dirty reds.
I know. I think that also if people haven't been watching many of our podcasts, people don't know what you guys have been trying, or Chris specifically has been trying to get me to say for many, many episodes.
Which is what, Shelley?
Yeah, what have I been trying to say?
Well, Matt already said it, so I don't need to.
What did he say?
Well, that is the most transparent way to try to get me to say it, and I don't know why you think that's going to succeed.
I don't know, Miss Butthole Camera.
We have to be so much more conniving than Shelley, and I'm just not sure I'm up to it.
That's because I'm Chinese.
Whoa, I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah, Shelley, this is deeply problematic.
That goes too far.
That's kind of worse, I think, than saying dirty reds. I mean, that's cute. What you just did was racism.
I don't think so, because it's like how you can make jokes about your own ethnicity, but other people can't do those things.
I can make jokes about AI programs?
Yeah. You can make as many Matrix jokes as you want. You're good.
That's my privilege. Hey, those surveillance cameras.
Yeah, but actually what interests me about what you were saying, Matt, about how it seems to be a very visible threat is the DoD has come out and said that in many ways it doesn't actually give the CCP more intelligence than their satellites, which are already circling like all around the world, already do.
But like somehow the satellites being in low Earth orbit don't count as U.S. airspace.
Well, also,
I'm not sure exactly
you
what
can't
the elevation.
see the satellite, right? Like you can see satellites at night, kind of like flying.
It's
over,
not a
but
giant, slow-moving balloon.
That's like hovering. Although this balloon is, I think one of the reasons they talked about it is because it was spending a lot of time hovering over Montana, where there is a Air Force base that houses nuclear silos.
Yeah. So this was a slightly different modus operandi for this balloon, even though it is fairly common, apparently, for Chinese spy balloons to be caught in the U.S. I love the Chinese response, though. They were like, "Don't worry, it's just a weather balloon."
Well, what they actually said it is Chinese. It is a civilian airship that is used mainly for meteorological research, and we are very sorry that it blew into U.S. territory.
Yeah, as sometimes weather balloons just do.
Yeah, but that also seems like such a non-denial denial, because isn't the go-to thing
Like
about spy balloons that they're weather balloons?
Well, also UFOs are weather balloons, right?
Yeah.
So now it's a whole other conspiracy theory. But the thing is, so that the U.S. had considered, like some people had considered, should we shoot it down?
Actually, I think that the Wall Street Journal reported that Biden had actually given the order to shoot it down, and then the Pentagon was like having a hard time finding any place to shoot it down that there wouldn't
Potentially cause like civilian problems.
Yeah, because
Good on Biden. Hey, Biden agreed with Trump then, because Trump
Did he
didn't
say
tweet
something
it.
about it?
He truthed
Okay.
on Truth Social. Shoot it down.
Oh, okay. That's all it said.
I have it somewhere. It was not. I mean, Trump is not necessarily like, shoot down the balloon.
Okay.
I assume he was talking about this balloon.
Not
just like balloons at like a children's party.
Yeah, maybe he was having a bad time on a 5-year-old's birthday.
I mean, but Biden's the cool guy who's like, yeah, I could totally shoot it down, but I don't need to.
Well, so there were a bunch of theories about this, because the reason the Pentagon gave was that they couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be civilian casualties of some kind because of like the debris raining down. But then some people think that, hey, maybe we're getting something off of this spy balloon. You know what I mean? Like, it's possible we are able to see what they're doing. Although I suppose if you shot it down and were able to collect the pieces, then you could see more clearly what was happening.
Or the U.S. government is covering for the Chinese government, covering
for the aliens?
for the aliens.
Yeah.
You followed me, Shelley.
Yes, I did. I felt like that energy where you wanted to say something about the aliens as soon as Matt had said something about UFOs, but you were holding back until the right moment.
Just building.
But
wow, we've gotten to know each other so well over a decade.
Well, yeah, when you've like eaten tear gas together, that's a real bonding experience.
Tear gas and youtiao.
Yeah. What a combination. Which is worse for your health? Fried dough sticks or tear gas?
I think it's all about the prolonged exposure.
True.
So prolonged exposure to youtiao is
definitely not
dangerous.
good for you. Yeah. Yeah, that's not good.
Someone needs to make the youtiao diets.
It's before we had youtiao before we discovered other options for Hong Kong breakfast.
Yeah, like the deep fried pork.
I was going to say, not that the other options were that healthy.
We'd go to that.
We shouldn't have been eating roast pork for
breakfast every day.
Yeah.
No, because some days we had the buns.
Filled with roast pork.
That's true. They were filled with roast pork.
I was like, find me one vegetable bun, please.
Yeah, there was apparently Hong Kong is one of the most meat-eating places in the world, and they tend to live very long too. So to that little disconnected anecdotal evidence, that's proof positive that you should eat as much meat as possible, and that the alien sent the balloon over America.
I mean, I think if the CCP was able to blame it on aliens, they probably would have.
That reminds me, a long time ago, there was like something about some Global Times article or something reporting that like the U.S. government was in cahoots with aliens.
Okay, I'm vaguely remembering this.
Yeah. All right. Talk. Let me see if I can find that.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing about the Global Times. Obviously it is our favorite Chinese state-run media, But
It's not because of their accuracy.
that's exactly.
Well, I mean,
Wait, but isn't the thing that the Chinese state-run media always accused other countries of doing what the CCP is actually doing?
yes, often. So are you saying this means that this is further proof that the CCP is working with the aliens?
It is suggestive.
It suggests. Yeah. I mean, they do that all the time with like, oh, these revolutions must be, or these protests must be infiltrated by Western forces trying to foment a color revolution in China,
Right. But it's actually the CCP fomenting its own. Right. I mean, like we later learned that the 2012 anti-Japanese protests were encouraged by the CCP, right? Because it had to do with their, trade war and the disputed islands and a whole political reason. So it was like the CCP allowed and encouraged people to protest against Japanese goods inside China when normally protests aren't allowed, right? But obviously the CCP is behind it. So yeah, I can get why they...
Yeah, you suspect everybody of doing what you're doing. I think this was an anecdote about after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when like U.S. and Russian nuclear scientists were going over and seeing each other's nuclear weapons because they were de-arming the Soviet Union, right, and kind of like dismantling some of the things. And then the American scientists were shocked at how much the Soviet Union had been doing that they hadn't disclosed, and the Soviet Union was shocked that the U.S. they had thought that the U.S. was doing a lot more stuff that they weren't disclosing, but the U.S. wasn't. Do you know what I mean? So like the Soviet scientists were suspecting the U.S. of doing essentially what they were doing, which is like violating all the treaties and secretly building way more nuclear whatever than they
injecting
said they
steroids into boxers to fight American boxers.
Is this a Rocky
think about Zangief. Like that guy is definitely on steroids.
I wasn't going there, but yeah, I like
Who?
Street Fighter.
Street Fighter 2.
Okay.
Zangief, which is I would say the hardest character to play though. Because all his moves were like a lot of weird like joystick things,
Really?
Yeah, I had a really hard time with that character.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Jumping back to what I was saying, because I basically have been ignoring whatever you were saying for the past 5 minutes. Back in, according to this 9 years ago, according to the Global Times, citing Iran's Fars News, which was citing Russia, which was citing Edward Snowden.
Okay, this is a long trail. Okay.
Nazi space aliens have secretly been controlling the United States government since World War II.
Wow. That's somehow way worse than I thought.
I think what it was that the space aliens had supported the Nazis.
Oh,
they switched sides
So the space aliens did not invent Nazism. It's just that they
supported the Nazis.
Okay.
Though, what did they give the Nazis? Did they give them technology? Did they give them ideology? I don't know.
I mean, there was a lot of advanced tech that the Nazis were doing. So where did they get all that tech?
Hydra.
Which
there you go.
Were aliens.
Well, I guess the tech was alien tech, right?
Yeah, and like Hydra, I think the show. What was that?
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Yeah. It was like a alien.
Oh, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. may not be canon anymore after did the whole
I'm just realizing that there are people watching this who are thinking like, oh my gosh, Marvel movies are actually disclosure.
Okay, so spy balloons.
99 of them, all red.
I think so it's also important to say that we're talking about this on Friday morning. So there could be a lot that maybe the balloon has been shot down by the time this is published, or who knows what had happened. But the latest thing that broke right before we started recording is that Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was supposed to go to China this weekend on the first diplomatic trip of the Biden administration to China, he was supposed to meet with Xi Jinping and everything, had postponed his trip because of the spy balloon.
Maybe he just didn't want to get COVID.
From Xi Jinping?
I mean
it's spreading in China.
The U.S. has to have a reaction, right? Like, if the U.S. doesn't react in some way that is measured with this violation, then the U.S. looks weak, right?
Well,
and China thinks that U.S.
But
will
that
push
doesn't
back.
hold because this has been happening it's pretty regular.
But I mean, I would guess that probably this happens all the time with not just China. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I don't know about that. Is England sending spy balloons all the time? Is Iran? I don't know about that.
England is just sending their best actors to take American jobs. Like how are English actors playing Batman, Superman? I mean,
are doctors in House?
Doctor Strange?
No, he means House.
Oh, House.
Yeah.
In that character.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
nice decade-old reference.
Oh my God, what happened?
But that's how it works politically, right? Like if an enemy country does something to you, you have to push back.
Well, no, my point is they have been doing this, and they
we
just
haven't
ignored
been
it.
pushing back. So this is a good sign, right? It's a good sign that the Biden administration is like, okay, well, we have to do something.
Well, we also don't know, like the stuff that's people saying that has happened. Like we don't actually have, like this is just like kind of like sources talking to the New York Times or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't actually know how often it happened. Like we don't have data about like whether this is really out of the ordinary because like of how long it's been staying over an Air Force base in Montana, or do you know what I mean? Like we actually don't know.
Well, that's what I wish I knew. Like why this time did the U.S. government decide to make a bigger deal?
Is it because civilians spotted it?
I don't know.
It's possible. I mean, I don't know if people were already taking photos of it before they came out with the announcement. But,
so it's just very hard to. Like I think that it's possible that if the U.S. government only the government saw it and there was no other civilian evidence, then it might just be easier for the U.S. government to not do anything and then just complain directly to China. And of course, that won't get anywhere. But
yeah, the fact that this has become public actually has become, like now. The senators from Montana are like, hey, what's going on? Like this is blown up into like a much bigger thing. But also, this is what you were talking earlier about, Matt. Like, why would you send a very visible balloon over the U.S. now?
It's a good question.
Yeah. So, like, right before, there's supposed to be like some kind of like diplomatic maybe renegotiation or like trying to like reset U.S.-China relations, all that kind of stuff.
So you're saying something smells fishy?
Yeah.
Something smells dirty?
No.
I think you read that wrong. But here's another possibility. It could just be incompetence. Like it could have just been a dumb decision. And like we think that, oh, the Chinese Communist Party is so clever and they always, they've got these strategy and these like flawless evil tactics, but like sometimes they just screw up and do dumb things.
Yeah, I mean, the balloon, according to the flight path that I've seen projected, seems to have come from central China. So it's not like they released it from Zhongnanhai, you know what I mean? So it is possible that somebody lower down made a stupid decision. I mean, it is also possible that due to inter-party, power struggles that like somebody wanted to mess up this meeting between Xi Jinping and the U.S., right?
Do you think they uploaded Jiang Zemin's consciousness into the balloon?
Into the
hoping
balloon.
It would get shot down?
Ooh.
Is he just like on a bunch of computers now? Like,
yeah. Speaking of AI, check out the most recent episode on Gamers Unbeaten about Nier Automata and the military-industrial complex. Speaking of AI.
After watching that Gamers Unbeaten video, I went down for like an hour, like a rabbit hole about the military-industrial complex. It was...
And now you feel better about the world?
I don't, surprisingly.
That makes me happy. That's what I want with Gamers Unbeaten, to open up horrible, dark rabbit holes that suck in people's souls.
I mean, I did that with our latest America Uncovered episode, actually.
Which one?
Oh, the episode that talked about the Pfizer.
Oh, the Project Veritas and the gain of function kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, you added an interesting point that I think is worth bringing up.
Because it does tie to China, right?
Yeah. So the Project Veritas had released this undercover video that allegedly shows a Pfizer employee that they claim was some like director level position. But I mean, also, I don't really know what that means in Pfizer, because in certain companies, like everybody is a vice president. So it's not clear how much decision making power
Am
this
I
guy
a vice
had.
president?
I I don't actually know we don't really have job titles.
You have a job title.
I do, but it's not like a job title that confers anything. It's humor ninja. That means nothing in any kind of organizational, hierarchy. But so the Pfizer the Project Veritas tape is undercover. This guy who thought he was on a date, and he was talking about how Pfizer had internal meetings about maybe mutating the virus to develop better vaccines, essentially. Like, that was the gist of the accusations.
And that the public wouldn't like that, so they were keeping it quiet.
Yeah, but he didn't actually claim that Pfizer was currently doing it. So then Pfizer came out with a rebuttal that was like, we have never done this kind of research on these vaccines.
Except sometimes we have.
Well, they said it wasn't gain of function that they said they were doing. They said that they sometimes do certain research to make sure that the antiviral properties work. And then they were like, this is research that's required by U.S. regulators for all antivirals. So they were like, this isn't anything out of the ordinary that we're doing, and we haven't. So they might not be lying when they say they haven't done any gain of function or a directed evolution research, because that's actually not the claim that the guy made.
Right. But then the larger point is...
The larger point that we made in our American Covered episode is that, it sounds horrifying to people. I think this is why this got a lot of play, right? Because it sounds horrifying to people that Pfizer would mutate a virus to make a better vaccine. But this is actually what the entire field of virology does. Mm-hmm. The point of the type of research that the EcoHealth Alliance, who was funding the Wuhan lab, among other things, does, this gain of function experiments to take viruses that they find in the wild that could affect humans at some point, and then manipulate them to actually be contagious to humans, is that they're trying to develop vaccines or treatments ahead of time. That's their whole excuse for it, right? That they're like, this is a good thing. This is cutting edge science because we're actually going to help. And we found a video from Peter Daszak, who's the head of EcoHealth Alliance, talking in 2019 about this, where he actually talks about how, coronaviruses are pretty, because of the spike protein, we can take that spike protein and put it on the backbone of another virus and basically do this type of experiments to see. He's talking about gain of function, where he's to see how they work. And then he says, it gives us a lot more diversity in the sequencing. So this is good. It's all presented as this is great science. Mm-hmm. It is going to help us.
And so give us taxpayer dollars to do this.
Yeah. Right. And then he specifically said, with the SARS virus, he's talking about the 2003 SARS virus. He was like, if you wanted to develop a vaccine for it, the logical thing to do is to take the SARS, pandemic SARS, the one that spread, and to try to develop a vaccine to it. But what if you took, and he's like, if you put in some of these related, essentially sequences, right, that then you could develop an even better vaccine. So he basically said it, the same thing that the Pfizer guy was saying, the idea that you could mutate viruses so that you could see what they were like and develop a vaccine for them.
Right, but he said it in 2019 before basically anyone had heard of COVID.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't remember exactly when in 2019 the video is from, but it's essentially him saying this is the great stuff we're doing, right?
And it would have continued to be great had there not been a global pandemic that people are tying to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But so, I mean, it is what the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing. It was that kind of research.
It was that kind of research. So
again, I'm not saying, just for clarity, I'm not saying we definitely know where COVID-19 came from.
Also, Pfizer vaccines against COVID are very effective and very good.
Thank you for the clarification.
Everyone should get them and get the third booster now, or the fourth booster. They're very effective.
So the point, though, is that what people are getting mad at is actually just almost standard practice. So you can also see why so many virologists came out and were like, oh, no, there's no way that this could have been a lab leak.
This is perfectly safe. What we're doing is safe.
Because, if it was a lab leak, it would basically call into question, all the stuff they said was safe actually created a dangerous pandemic. You said you were going to prevent the next pandemic by doing this research, and instead you created the next pandemic. So there goes all of your government funding. There goes all, it's just... like a lot of people are invested. I mean, not everybody. There are a lot of virologists who have spoken out against this and said we need to actually investigate and make sure we're
were
not
silenced.
Yes, but like there was this big institutional push, especially at the beginning, led by Peter Daszak, to like refute all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is amazing that at the beginning, Peter Daszak, who was the head of the EcoHealth Alliance, who was doing this gain of function research in the Wuhan lab, he was the loudest voice about there is no way this could have been a lab leak. It came from nature.
Actually, he secretly organized like a bunch of scientists to write that letter.
Yeah, who also, all of them ended up, I think except for maybe one, were also taking money from
Well, they
China
had ties
in
some ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, there was, I think in 2018, a U.S. review of that facility found that they were not following the highest biosafety levels, like some experiments that should have been done in biosafety level 4, which is like spacesuits, were being done in biosafety level 2, which is like masks and gloves.
We were joking that people were basically sterilizing their groceries with biosafety level 2 back when people thought that we needed to sterilize groceries,
I remember that. Good times.
Yeah. So, I mean, apropos of nothing, it would be a great scientific experiment? We should create zombies so that we can understand how to fight zombies in case there's a zombie apocalypse.
And what could go wrong with infecting people and turning them into zombies? Because,
but
they would never escape the lab
conditions.
Yeah, well, I mean, you start with like making a zombie rat or a chimpanzee.
And,
it won't spread.
There you go.
Just make sure you use biosafety level Z.
Ooh. Well, isn't that how like the zombie outbreak started from China in World War Z, right?
No, that was like their organ harvesting. Right?
Yeah, it was through organ harvesting, and that just created some kind of virus. That's a little, what we were just talking about is a little more like 28 days later.
Okay.
Which was like a rage virus or something. They were studying where rage comes from.
Like the emotion rage?
Yeah, something like that in order to cure it. And so then like these animal activists like broke into a lab and like released some infected animals because, they were going to save the environment. And then, they get mauled by the animals. And then, 28 days later, you have a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Army of the Dead started with some government, government was transporting zombies.
Oh, wasn't that, it was like a military zombie, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't very clear how the military got a zombie.
There's a lot of hand waving in that film, but like the point is the military had him like in a container, but then there was an accident on the road, and then
so the point is like in pop culture, there's definitely is the idea of like experiments going wrong,
right? But in real life,
that never happens.
Everyone's so competent and totally on the same page when it comes to science.
They never take any shortcuts. They never do something in biosafety level 2 that should be done in level 4. No virus has ever escaped a lab like the SARS virus did in 2004 in Beijing and caused another outbreak.
CERN is definitely not colliding universes together, which is how we end up with the Mandela effect.
Okay, that's a different. You taken that in a completely different direction now.
I did. My job requires me to spend a lot of time on the internet, and I see things, Shelley.
Well, speaking of deluding ourselves into thinking that science is all on the same page, John Kerry.
Oh, wait. Before we get to that, though, but I think the point of the virology thing and the Pfizer thing is that if you're mad about the Pfizer video, you actually should just be mad at the entire field of virology and what they've been doing for years and claiming that it's like all positive. And maybe we should be looking into whether this is a good idea, Yeah. Yeah.
So I had a great transition.
That I'm sorry, totally busted.
Yeah.
But, okay, so science.
This is the first on the show that somebody
has interrupted somebody in a bad way.
I know. And
oh my gosh.
Something.
Is this how it feels? Well, I think the only way for me to deal with this is to just do it more to you as revenge.
I'm not sure you could do it more.
You're like, I am not going to grow from this. There's no introspection happening here. We're gonna talk about John Kerry.
Yeah. Speaking of no introspection.
That was good, actually.
Wow. Great transition, Shelley. Yeah.
All right. So John Kerry is the current special climate envoy to China, right? And the idea is that despite all the differences, that we have with China and the CCP, of course, the government doesn't usually call them CCP. Despite all the differences, at least there's this one thing we can work together on. And the problem is that in so many ways, the push to work with China on climate change, but it could be on anything, right? It prevents us, if we feel that we, the US government, need to work with China, are reliant on working with China on something really important, then it makes us back off from doing things that we should do to counter the Chinese Communist Party or to speak out against their abuses against their own people, like the Uyghurs and Falun Gong, or things that they're doing globally. And so having John Kerry, who's a very powerful and influential person in this position, is making it harder for the rest of the US government to stand up to China.
It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I've heard the argument that, oh, well, like we can still work together on climate and also still call out their genocide of the Uyghurs, for example, which I think is theoretically true. Like you can still do that. And the US government has done that, except for the fact that that's not how the CCP operates.
Right.
The CCP will want you to, because they constantly say this, right? Like not just diplomatically, but also in the state-run media, in the propaganda. So they're always saying that like, oh, well, for us to really work with the US has to really understand China, and they can't just like pick and choose, and they have to like accept us like the way,
like they basically they take it personally, right? Like for example, the US and Canada have disputes over things, right? We even have territorial disputes in some islands, like off the coast of Maine, right? Like a lot of there's a lot of disagreements, but the U.S. and Canada are basically both in the same category of rational government, where we can work together on things that are important. For example, piping oil from the Alberta tar sands into the U.S. quietly. But there's that cooperation. But the CCP operates in a way where it's like, if you have a disagreement about one thing, they take it so personally that they will punish you in totally other unrelated ways, right?
Well, it's
and
also
that's what makes it hard to work with
higher level than that. It's like the Chinese Communist Party considers itself at war with the United States. So its goal is not to find a way to work well with the United States.
The goal is to use climate change as like a stick to beat the U.S. over the head with, and be like, okay, well, or to dangle a little carrot and be like, hey, you can, if you like, we'll work with you, but you have to give us concessions on other things.
Yeah, or design policies that handicap American business and industry, but allow China exceptions.
Right. I mean, when it comes to like the core, there are several things that make economic growth possible in a country, right? And there are, legal things, having good legal system and having, free markets. But one of the really big important things for any country is low cost energy, right? And so the CCP is using climate change as a way to basically ensure that energy is cheaper in China than it is in the US, because they understand the economics of that. If energy is expensive, you don't want to put factories there. You don't want to do cutting edge AI research, because that's very energy intensive as well. So, energy costs are cheaper in China, and now manufacturing makes more sense in China. And it's a little more complex than that, because a lot of it's not direct. But this is a big thing that the CCP understands. And they've taken advantage of sort of greenwashing to do things like, criticize the US, and say, obviously you need solar panels, right? And they're making solar panels now in China using, in some cases, Uyghur slave labor.
Also, I think a lot of it was technology transfer from the US, right?
Right, stolen technology. And also some of those factories themselves are powered on a coal grid. So the idea you're making solar panels, manufacturing them in a factory where the energy to power the factory comes from the highest carbon emitting source of energy. Well, coal's not the highest, but it's a high one, right? So like it's just total nonsense. And it's like the U.S. is making this disconnect. Like the way to work with China on climate change is to get the CCP to make promises for the future, which
they will
stupid.
Definitely shut down their coal plants, except for the ones that they're currently building more of.
Right, and then two, being able to buy at a lower cost renewable energy hardware from China, like solar panels and wind turbines. And that it's just idiotic, right? It's not going to work. If your goal is to reduce carbon emissions globally, it is not going to work to continue to use Chinese manufacturing. Like if we made all our solar panels and wind turbines in American factories, the cost would be a little more expensive, right? Because it's the power grid's more expensive here. But then you wouldn't have these dirty factories in your supply chain. You wouldn't have all this pollution happening, right? So
who thought about supply chains before 2020, really? Like, I don't think people thought about that. You know what I mean?
Right, and I think largely we as a nation are still thinking about supply chains in terms of how easy is it to get this, what can cause a disruption in the supply chain. But my point is that like at the core of China's manufacturing supply chain is environmentally destructive power sources.
Also slave labor.
And slave labor. But
not just the Uyghurs, also like
even if you don't
labor,
care about them putting ethnic minorities in concentration camps and whatever, right? You should there's people who care about that stuff, and there's people who care about carbon emissions, and so even if those aren't always the same groups, right? Like you don't just have to find the intersection of that Venn diagram. Like anyone from any of those groups should be like, hey, there's something we have to look at here. And you have to look at China's carbon emissions.
But they can kind of get away with it by claiming essentially that they are still a developing country and that it wasn't fair for developed countries like the U.S. to be able to pollute for so many years and then get ahead technologically, right? But so they're like, we should be allowed to pollute now.
But that's totally illogical because, like, if you're concerned about carbon in the atmosphere causing global warming or climate change in general, then it shouldn't matter who's producing those carbon emissions. It's just the total net volume of carbon, right? So it doesn't make any logical sense to let some countries have a pass. Like if you're concerned about that, then the U.S.'s goal should be to get the countries that are the biggest carbon emitters to reduce their amount of carbon emissions no matter what.
But I think that what the CCP has done is essentially weaponized a different part of the climate change activism, which is that blaming the industrialized nations for exploiting these other third world countries.
In many cases, blaming capitalism.
Yeah, so it's like kind of the same thing where like Greta Thunberg at some point tweeted about like how the climate change is the fault of the global north for exploiting other countries. Like, so the global north is industrialized, like Western developed nations, right? And the global south is countries like Africa, South America, China considers themselves part of the global south.
Yes, we may be evil capitalists here, but we have less pollution per kilowatt hour produced.
No, what I'm saying is
than socialist countries.
That like what you're saying logically makes sense, but what the CCP is doing is weaponizing a different outrage involved in
like the evils of capitalism.
Well, or oppression, right? Like the idea that like China is a victim country because it is a developing third world country.
In reality, China is a victim country because everyone's victimized by the Chinese Communist Party.
But like the whole idea that like, oh, the CCP, for example, even the fact that there's so many Western developed nations like exporting their manufacturing to China, right? Because what you talked about with cheap energy, cheap labor, there's a way to spin that so that China is actually the victim here of these oppressive Western nations outsourcing their manufacturing. And we are actually the ones causing this like the carbon emissions in China because we're like through capitalism, right? Like trying to get the lowest price, et cetera. So I'm just saying that there is a way that they're logically able to play this game that kind of absolves them of blame from the stuff that you're talking about.
Socialism, communism, it's all about gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and the reason we launched into this whole thing about, John Kerry and climate change is because, and I had failed to mention the reason, but there was a news item this week that is tied into that, which is the House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer is demanding that John Kerry basically turn over any documents related to what Comer believes are secret negotiations with the Chinese regime, that could potentially undermine larger U.S. interests.
Is there proof that Kerry has been having secret negotiations?
Well, so that's the thing. Like, it's like Republicans want all the documents released, and surely there are documents, right? Like, yeah, but John Kerry is in a cabinet level position, which
but he's not actually a member of the cabinet.
No,
right?
But it's at that level. He's reporting directly to the president, and that position does not require. It doesn't require the same type of oversight as a lot of other positions. There's no Senate approval like there would be for like a Supreme Court justice. So he's just kind of like this guy that's tagged on, and there's just no oversight really of what he's doing or how his budget is being spent. And so this could be just a Republican move to attack Kerry and attack Biden. It could also be born out of legitimate concern for what could possibly be in those exchanges.
Well, because there is a history of a lot of climate discussions being done outside of the view of the American public. Like that was a big criticism of the whole Paris Climate Agreement, that it was a decision sort of done by these global leaders, and it affected American industry.
But it didn't have to be essentially put to a vote in a way because it didn't go through Congress.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is precedent for the idea that there would be these outside channels doing things, making agreements behind the scenes that the American public is unaware of.
I think there is some evidence that the Biden administration themselves have been upset with John Kerry or members of the Biden administration, because when Kerry was doing climate negotiations with China, like I don't remember if it was last year or 2021, there was a bunch of leaks that happened that were reported in the media about how there was frustration with Kerry, like wanting to downplay certain like human rights things so they could get action on climate change or whatever. And this is all leaks coming from within the Biden administration.
Interesting.
So I think that there was a certain amount of tension between people with different agendas, right? Like people who felt like Kerry and his climate change agenda was undermining other parts of the China policy that they were trying to carry out. So that was part of it. And I think another part is that there's been also reporting that Kerry and his counterpart on the Chinese side, the climate envoy who was dealing with Kerry from China, have known each other for like over a decade, essentially, because they both had like different positions, like when Kerry was Secretary of State. So like essentially you start to feel like you're building a relationship with a person, and that could be good for diplomacy, but there are also pitfalls there, right? Where you can start to feel like what this person like tells you, like, I mean, you can trust him personally, you know what I mean? Or you feel like, oh, if he promises you that like they're going to stop building coal plants, then,
Which is kind of how China has done it all along, by having, building these relationships and, sort of selling this idea to American officials or business leaders that,
I'm telling you the truth, right? Like you don't listen to what we're saying publicly. Like you're getting the inside scoop.
And Chinese, the MSS and the United Front have been very good at sort of building relationships with in a sort of shotgun approach for like, here's 1,000 people who could have political potential, right? Let's start building the relationship while they're young and don't have a high position.
Eric Swalwell.
Right. And then later, of those 1,000, maybe only a few dozen will end up in an important level, but we've built that relationship and now we have influence.
Yeah, I was thinking that actually, you mentioned Swalwell, which is like when he was running for Congress, right? People worked in his campaign. That woman that turned out to be a Chinese spy. But then, like, even, for example, the current mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, has taken a bunch of business trips to China when he was Brooklyn borough president, which is like a pretty, not like a super high level position in like the city administration, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the equivalent of being the mayor of a large city, because Brooklyn has like 2 million plus people. Yeah. So it's as a borough subset of New York City, it's still a big city on its own. So he's like the mayor of that, right?
But he was not like Bloomberg, or he was not I mean, Bloomberg's another story, but so he was not like the mayor of New York City or the governor of a state.
But
or
any
anything.
borough president has potential to become the mayor.
Yeah. So
of the city. So yeah.
There was this whole thing where they were going to build this like Chinese friendship arch in the Brooklyn Chinatown, and millions of dollars were going to go into it, and it was a big thing and never got built. But he'd made several trips to China.
Yeah. For friendship.
To improve business ties between Brooklyn
and again, I think the point comes back to the balloon is not the biggest issue we have.
But the balloon is a very visible symbol of certain things, right? So I think that's why it became such a big news story, is because it does feel like a throwback to a different time where people were like, oh, wait, this country might be a threat.
Yeah, and maybe that's why the government publicizes it so much, to sort of get, because the whole TikTok as a threat thing, I don't know how many people are really eating that up, because I think a lot of people really like TikTok and don't want to have it banned.
Mm-hmm.
But giant spy balloons,
there was so much outrage when India banned TikTok, right? I mean, India banned it for two reasons. One was national security, just because of the app and its influence and political influence, but also it was in retaliation to some degree for the border dispute that arguably was sparked by China. And so, but there was outrage inside India. There was a lot of media companies, including Western American media, bemoaning how, these like poor people who've developed their careers on TikTok are now have lost their platform, right? So
but there will be another platform, is the thing. Like, yes. That's what you want. You want it to be. This is why I'm surprised that Instagram or like YouTube or whatever are not more gung-ho on the banning TikTok thing. Because shouldn't Facebook or Meta want to get Instagram Reels to be the thing that everybody's using? So
maybe that's the question. Why aren't they?
I wonder who has a stake in what. But anyway, that's I don't actually know the answer to that. But my point is that in terms of a very serious national security threat like TikTok, there's so much pushback on it. But a very visible national security threat like a balloon, there's no one's like, oh, but I love the weather balloon. This is so cool, right? No one's dancing to it. And
okay, that's where I was going. Okay,
I got it.
Thank you, Chris. And so therefore, you want to criticize the Chinese balloon. There's no pushback on that, right?
Where are the balloons defenders?
Spy balloons are good, actually. Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's some trolls that are going to make that argument, but or the argument that, well, America does it too, or whatever. But the point is that all voters can agree, basically, that
but it's hard to agree to a nationwide TikTok ban.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's hard to get, when Chinese private equity firms are investing in, say, U.S. tech startups, right? If you ban that, then there's complaints from the tech industry hey, you're actually hurting American
China was
innovation.
Giving us all this great money and you just want to take it away.
Well, I mean, there's also different stakeholders. I actually got an email from Freedom House that was opposing the TikTok ban.
Interesting.
Because, Freedom House, they do the Freedom in the World Index, they advocate for freedom in different countries, basically. But their point was that a lot of activists in different oppressive regimes use TikTok as a way of communicating. They brought up the Iranian protests that were happening recently,
right.
And how without TikTok in the U.S., U.S. activists would not be able to get information from the Iranian activists about what was happening in Iran.
But what about Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, they were also using Twitter a lot too.
So while the activists are activizing on TikTok, all that data is potentially being collected. All the personal data of those activists is potentially being collected by the Chinese Communist Party or its affiliates.
Which I'm sure would have no problem giving that to the Iranian regime.
Right.
So they really should be using Twitter, or if they want to really share their truths with the world.
Oh, gosh.
So if only there was some social platform for that. I don't know.
Yeah, social truth platform.
That's a great name. You should create a platform.
Social
like that.
truth, where you socialize.
With the truth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the truth about socialism.
Send out socializing. Well, it's not just weather balloons the Chinese Communist Party is sending over countries. They've been sending a lot of warplanes over Taiwan consistently all the time, but even more now.
Shelley's going to correct you on the over Taiwan part.
Taiwan really is in all of us.
Taiwan can touch your heart.
Yeah.
Taiwan, yeah.
Go ahead, Accuracy Ninja.
Oh, I mean, not...
Well, I can do it myself. Technically, it's not over Taiwan, but they've been crossing the median line, which was the sort of unofficial barrier between China and Taiwan. They've been crossing that more frequently, coming close to Taiwanese airspace, but not actually flying over Taiwan Island. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
So sometimes all it takes is Shelley to just give you a look, and that
I felt like you felt it in my energy, actually.
Yeah.
That I was just like... Oh.
But I was right, though, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That it was like not over Taiwan. You were right. We've known each other too long.
That's the real message behind all of this. But this is interesting. China's increasing aggression for Taiwan because everyone has been like, okay, the Chinese Communist Party has blatantly said they want Taiwan. They've pretty much hinted that they will use force if that's their only option to get Taiwan. So when is it going to be? When are they going to invade Taiwan? And a lot of numbers have been thrown out there. Some have even said as recently as 2024, making it just a year away. Some have said 2027 gets thrown around a lot.
Was that like the retired admiral of the Indo-Pacific guy, Davidson, who said 2027?
I believe so. There's been some other people who have suggested that. But this week, a U.S. Air Force general, Minihan, suggested that it could be 2025, just 2 years away.
The memo he wrote was somehow leaked because it was dated February 1st, but it was like published in NBC News like before February 1st.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I didn't catch that. And like this is him just saying like my gut feeling. He actually used that term. My gut feeling is we'll be fighting by 2025, which the Pentagon has been like, no, this is just him talking. This is not our position. But it is an interesting time because that actually does sync up with something a Taiwanese defense minister had said that China would be ready to invade by 2025. Minihan also suggested that, it would be after the U.S. and Taiwan presidential election. The Taiwanese election will definitely factor into the CCP's plan, depending on who gets elected. If it's another, kind of Tsai Ing-wen person, or if it's somebody who's more friendly.
Tsai can't run again.
No, so she's out.
But
maybe her cats.
VP is pretty popular, I think.
I forget his name. VP.
But I haven't really been paying attention as much to like Taiwanese internal politics. Some people think that because the KMT won more like local elections this year, that means it's like bad, or last year, 2022, that means bad news for the DPP, the current party in power, who's more anti-CCP. But generally, like local elections in Taiwan tend to be more focused on local elections. And
like local issues.
And they're not necessarily thinking of like KMT as the pro-CCP party. And the KMT, it may be also less feasible for them to be as pro-CCP as they were like a decade or more ago under Ma Ying-jeou. Remember when he met Xi Jinping? And that was like a big reconciliation moment.
Yeah, I mean, post Hong Kong now, there's no way that's going to fly.
Yeah, so I think also the political environment in Taiwan has changed a lot. But if another DPP person gets elected, then I think then it's more likely that the CCP would have to be like, well, we're probably not going to be able to get them on our side by just being like, hey, one country, two systems, let's do business.
Right. But also part of the calculation is like whoever wins the next U.S. presidential election. So the election's 2024, president takes office January 2025. And the CCP will look at whether they think, like what they think the U.S. response is going to be based on who that new president is, right? It's going to be very different with Biden, who said specifically he's going to, he would defend Taiwan. versus, say, Kamala Harris, who has not been outspoken in anything, versus, say, Trump or DeSantis, who have their own calculuses on that, right?
Well, I think also outside of like whatever a U.S. president might do, if you haven't noticed, U.S. elections lately have been a bit chaotic. I think there's a big hope that like America would just be too caught up in whatever the 2024 presidential election scandal will be to put much focus on like defending Taiwan.
Yeah. I mean, Taiwan's elections are in January, presidential elections. So there's a long time between that and the November U.S. elections.
Well, yeah. But so that's why, 2025 as an invasion time, that would be like Arizona will still be counting ballots. I'm
not ready for the next election cycle.
Let's remember this in 2025 where that actually happens. Let's play this.
Oh gosh, the world sometimes is just overwhelming to me.
But well, I mean, sometimes it surprises you. Like I did not have Chinese spy balloon flies over Montana on my bingo card. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And that could have really changed. Like, let's say there was no spy balloon. Blinken went to China this weekend. Like that could actually have a much bigger effect on U.S.-China diplomacy than you thought.
You know who we should be thanking for this? The CERN reactor for fusing this timeline in with ours.
The timeline in which there's a Chinese spy balloon?
And Blinken doesn't go to China, because otherwise we'd be going down that
How do you
path.
know that? Anyway, not gonna ask.
I had a dream. I get all of my information. Well, I mean, that's actually a pretty good transition. There is some good news, and there's actually a lot of good news going on. Did we want to say anything more about
war might be coming in 2020?
War might be coming in 2025.
I mean, that's a pretty big piece of like bad news, right?
Yeah.
It's a bad news for almost everyone, but not if you watch Gamers Unbeaten for the military-industrial complex.
That's where you're going with it. Yes.
2 pushes. But yeah, I mean, like one of the concerns I think is that, there are some people, since we're talking about the military-industrial complex, the idea that people would actually want a war with China rather than like, the point of U.S. support for Taiwan is to prevent a war from happening. Even worse, I think some people think, a war could be a good way to get Xi Jinping ousted. Sort of the whole anti-Xi, not anti-CCP crowd.
But I mean, that's a risky bet.
It's a risky bet, yeah.
Yeah, for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it's also it's a risky bet where it's not just like you assume past performance will affect future results, but it's like not looking at all at past performance of the CCP.
Well, it's
and just you have this beautiful dream of.
That's true. Yeah. But also, it's not necessarily that getting into a war that doesn't go well means that you're going to get ousted. Look at Putin.
That's right.
Yeah. There was all this idea that maybe he would have to lose power because the war's
oligarchs
not going
would
well.
Demand it. But instead, he just killed all the oligarchs.
Yeah, all those oligarchs just kept drinking like bad tea.
Or jumping out of like 8-story buildings for some reason, But so that's not a guarantee of anything. It's just
no. But I mean, the Taiwan issue will come to a head at some point, and the CCP has said they will use force. So I mean, this is really the time now to really solidify U.S. support for Taiwan, and you do see a lot of strides in that area.
McCarthy is reportedly about to go to Taiwan maybe in the spring.
So that would be the second Speaker of the House to go since Pelosi went last time,
and a little less diplomatically risky in a way because McCarthy is a Republican, so like it wouldn't necessarily be seen by the CCP as like, oh well, the Biden administration is behind this because
but it's still going to anger China.
Oh sure, I mean everything like will anger China related to Taiwan because they're trying to get you to that point where you're afraid of them being. It's like an abusive parent or something like that. Like you just always get worried about making them mad or You know
what they would call it if McCarthy goes to Taiwan? McCarthyism.
I can actually imagine the Global Times
saying that like
trying
the
to
new McCarthyism.
Cut this clip out. We'll use it.
This is our prediction. The Global Times will say this is McCarthyism.
Yeah.
Maybe
when
they'll
McCarthy
say
goes to
American
Taiwan.
political commentator Chris Chappell calls it McCarthyism.
I don't think they will.
If anyone from the Global Time is watching, please do that.
You've never been criticized by the Global Times, only by China Daily.
I know, it's not the same.
I know.
Someday. Someday, I hope.
Someday we'll make it.
Big dreams, Chris.
Well, that would be a nice thing. And there are some nice things that are happening with respect to China.
I see your transition.
It's good. It's worked. It worked.
It would have worked better if you hadn't called it out. Anyway, so there's something I really think we should check out.
Oh, you're talking about the Biden administration doing the Hong Kong.
Ooh. Undermined.
Yeah.
No. Let's talk about the Czech Republic.
Yeah. Or as nobody calls it, Czechia.
Let's Czechia it out.
This doesn't work.
No. They have a new president-elect who is, I believe the kids would call it based.
About Taiwan or China?
Yes.
Yeah.
He wants to develop closer ties with Taiwan.
Well, he took a phone call from Tsai Ing-wen.
Yeah.
The last president-elect to do that was
Donald Trump.
Yes.
But it wasn't just doing that show support for Taiwan. He was also saying Western democracies, the CCP. I forget his exact words.
Is not friendly. China is not friendly.
Yeah.
We need to. It's just a fact that we need to recognize.
Yeah. And it's like, wow.
Which is not. He just said they were not friendly and they weren't going to go along with what Western countries wanted in terms of political.
It wasn't way milder than what most actual citizens are thinking. Right.
China is asshole.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to see a diplomat say something like that, a politician.
Yeah. I don't know. American politics is getting very strange. I was going to say,
Donald Trump is the kind of person who might just say that or might just tweet it at 3 a.m. or, truth it at 3 a.m. The point is, so this new Czech president-elect, Petr Pavel.
He said the thing about China, about them not being friendly, and everyone was kind of like, because even though it's mild, having a world leader from a Western country say this is not very common.
I don't know how we can say that China isn't friendly, though. They're sending us all these nice weather balloons.
All the balloons?
All the balloons.
This is a gift.
What could be friendlier?
So the question is, what is the CCP's reaction going to be? Are they going to try to punish the Czech Republic when he takes office in March? Right. They may not be able to do anything now because they still have the old president who was very China friendly.
They've already told him that he's hurt the feelings of the Chinese people because of the Tsai Ing-wen phone call. This guy also used to be a general and also was involved with NATO. He was in the NATO command or something like that before he got into politics. So I think he's probably coming at it from a different angle than the previous president,
leftist president,
Miloš Zeman, who was very pro CCP.
Right. And what's interesting is Zeman had basically worked with all these Chinese companies to invest in the Czech Republic, and actually Chinese companies started buying up a bunch of Czech media companies. That it has been scaled back somewhat since then. But that was a big deal, and also Chinese investment in the Czech energy sector. It's not random what Chinese companies want to invest in, right? It's things that are going to give the Communist Party real control.
It always has a strategic purpose because everything in China is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, which, speaking of, I'll just put a little suggest people check out our episode that came out last week on China. No, it came out this week. As of when this podcast comes out, it will have come out this week. The episode about how China uses private equity investments to kind of gain access to sensitive technology. I know you mentioned it a bit earlier in this podcast, Matt. But it's a good episode. I would recommend checking it out.
Well, the last thing I want to say, Pavel actually gave another interview because he told Financial Times that China is not friendly. This is what he told Bloomberg. It's definitely not a friend. It's not, at this point, an enemy. It's a country based on entirely different values. Their long-term goals are different than ours.
Well, I would disagree with that. It's definitely an enemy.
Yeah, I don't think we're at the place where people are going to say that.
Yeah, but also like you're not running for office, so
Oh, well, I would like to announce my entry into the election race.
Which one is that?
All of them.
All of them.
Just vote for me.
See, I think that if I were going to run for office,
Chris Chappell for Brooklyn Borough President.
I just get elected to like 100 different small things, and then I have a million things on my plate.
See, I think if I were a politician, I would just scale things back, and so instead of like living my values, I would just try to project what I think voters want to hear, and also that's going to get me the least criticism from the mainstream media. And so, yeah, like I totally get it.
Isn't that what politicians do in general?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I would do if I wanted to actually get elected. Right? It's all about hiding your real feelings and suppressing your own values for the greater good. And the greater good being getting yourself elected.
I don't know. Hiding and suppressing your feelings. That doesn't sound like you, Matt.
Wow. Okay. This just got real.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It got real.
We're going to need to start a therapy channel or something like that.
Therapy Unhinged?
Just Matt Unhinged.
Well, I think we're already pushing you there by making you watch those Hunter Biden tapes.
So I recorded for America Uncovered Headlines, which came out on Saturday. Like I had to record this morning the clip of like me reacting to the Hunter Biden videos. It was actually very like it's emotionally very challenging.
Cathartic.
To deal with that headspace. Well, no, because I did actually not this morning, but I did actually watch the Hunter Biden videos back when they first came out because you had actually asked me to do that. And I was like, okay, I'll just see if like what's actually here. And like, it is really awful. Anyway, the point is that,
the point is that we are damaging Matt and traumatizing him for the greater good, which is YouTube views.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
But so we do it for you.
Hong Kongers are allowed to still stay in the U.S. and live and work. There was an extension that was given that was supposed to end on the beginning of February, and then like they would have had to like go back to Hong Kong or something,
or they wouldn't have been allowed to
work,
or they wouldn't have been allowed to like stay in the U.S. under particular visa situations.
And this is a big deal because like sometimes like some of the Hong Kongers who've gone to the UK, for example, under like a refugee status type visa, they can stay there, but they can't actually work, which means that they have to rely on other people to support them, which is a really awkward and kind of unfair situation to put activists in. And so I applaud the Biden administration for just being like, all right, we're going to extend this for 24 months. And I mean, it could be extended beyond that, right?
I mean, it was kind of like down to the wire a little bit because I know a lot of Hong Kong groups had been like lobbying for a while because it was very soon that the like cutoff deadline was coming up, and the Biden administration hadn't been saying that they were going to do it.
Right, but I mean, it's better late than never, and this is protecting. One group estimated something like 3,000 to 4,000 Hong Kongers.
Yeah, we actually haven't. There haven't been as many Hong Kongers coming to the U.S.
Right. Well, it's been harder than going to the UK.
Yes, because under the British National Overseas passports, like if you were born in Hong Kong before July 1997, or your parents were there were ways that you could get a British BNO passport, which made you a British overseas national, which some people argue about that because like these people weren't made British citizens, like they weren't given the protection of British citizenship when Hong Kong transferred sovereignty back to China. But the BNO lets them, if they have that passport, they can travel to the UK. And about almost 150,000 Hong Kongers have moved to the UK in the last few years under the BNO passport scheme.
Right. Well,
include Canada too?
No, just the UK.
Just the UK.
Yeah. I mean, little known fact, the US also has something like that for American Samoa. Like most people in US territories like Puerto Rico or Guam are US citizens. But if you're born in American Samoa, you're merely a U.S. national. So you can live and work in the U.S., but then you have to apply through an immigration process if you want to become a full citizen to vote.
Yeah.
Or serve on jury duty if that's what you want.
But
American dream.
The BNO thing is different than what you're talking about. You were talking about people who are Hong Kongers who didn't qualify for BNO because they're too young or something like that, coming to the UK and asking for asylum.
Right.
Which
and
in that case, they cannot work.
They can't work.
Yeah.
But the U.S. and the Biden administration has given them the ability to also work. So they can essentially set up a life here. I mean, it's hard when you don't know what's going to happen in 2 years, but it's still way better than not being able to work and still not knowing what's going to happen in 2 years.
Yeah. And it is a sign that, when you pressure elected officials to do things that also make them look good, you can actually get them to do things.
Yeah. So here we are, praising the Biden administration for doing the right thing.
They've actually done a lot of really solid
things
that have been good on China, I think. John Kerry aside.
Well, that's what I was saying. There seemed to have been a little friction
there. Strap
Yeah.
him to the weather balloon and send it back.
Oh,
like
no.
that idea.
It's like, I thought we were ending on a positive note here.
To me, that's a positive note. Thanks for watching China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang. We're not actually condoning any kind of threat to American officials.
Yes, yes.
That was a
Yes,
joke.
that was a
Chris
joke.
didn't mean it.
No.
And I'm Mechanized.
Talk to you next time, I hope.